Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for Protecting Your Investment and Overview of Disability Insurance. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes here to make sure everybody can get in the waiting room, and we'll get started here in a second. All right, welcome in, Shelby. So, for those of you just joining us, Shelby Heiser has helped thousands of doctors shop for disability insurance, and she'll be leading your session tonight. So you'll be in good hands. If you have a question during the session, go ahead and drop it into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get those answered at the end. All right, Shelby, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for joining and allowing me to talk with you about the topic of disability insurance. Like Sam said, my name is Shelby. I'm one of the advisors here at Pattern. So today what we hope to do is kind of do an overview of disability insurance, what it is, what to look for, kind of how the process works, and how to get started with your own quotes personalized to you. At Pattern, first and foremost, we believe in educating more than anything on kind of the ins and outs and what to look for. There's lots of things that can impact price and which company is best for you. So we really believe on having all of your quotes in one spot. That way you can really see all of your options and it makes it much simpler. So to get started with what disability insurance is. So ultimately, disability insurance is a type of insurance that is going to replace your income if you can't work. So in the event of illness or injury and you're unable to work, it's going to replace that income. Now, there are some nuances to that and some different types of language. So when it comes to income replacement, usually it's if you can't work any job at all. So you really have to prove that you're unable to work at any capacity. Now, for physicians, which Pattern, we really focus on the physician specific type of insurance, there is a specific type of language called own occupation. So what own occupation does is it covers you if you can't work your job or your own specialty, even if you're employed somewhere else. So for example, the person doing procedures that maybe does a mixture of procedural work and clinical work, but can't do some of the procedures or all of the procedures. Own occupation is still going to replace that portion of income, even if that doctor can keep working in the capacity of seeing patients, or for the person that is practicing, maybe not doing as hands-on. In the event that anything impacts your ability to do your job long term, you're going to get covered, even if you could go on to do teaching or research or work in any other capacity. A lot of physicians could still apply the long years of training and knowledge to something else instead of just staying disabled or being able to prove that they can't work any job. And so this allows you to get that income replacement for your own job while still allowing you to use that potential in work earning another income. Now, there's only 5 companies that offer that more defined language. So those 5 are shown here: Principal, Mass Mutual, Guardian, Emeritus, and Standard. So Pattern, we narrow it down to those 5 since we're working with physicians. We want to make sure we're going over the ones that are own occupation. But out of those 5, there's still nuances with, demographics that can impact the price, or health concerns that can impact which one is best for each person. So we're still going to compare and shop all 5 of them for you in one spot. That way you can kind of pick the best one for your specific situation. So in terms of when you should plan on getting disability insurance, I mean, ultimately, the best time is right now. And I know that sounds cliche, but it'd be great if you could get it right before you get disabled. And unfortunately, it doesn't usually work that way. So the sooner you get it, what we say is the more you're going to be able to cover, because the big part of this is the health side of things. If you have pre-existing conditions, those types of things are not going to be covered under a policy. And a lot of times, those are maybe the things that could lead to a disability. Not only that, Some are seen as more minor or minimal in the eyes of the insurance company and might just be excluded. Others are seen as more high risk and might actually impact your ability to get a policy altogether. So health is definitely a huge part of that. And uh, the sooner you do that, the more coverage you can get up front. Now, discounts are a huge factor in that as well because there's only a certain time frame that you can get discounts. So, as a resident, a med student, a fellow in training with your program, there are discounts available that can be up to 30% off the policy. Now, locking that in training and then transitioning into an attending job where your income's obviously going to go up significantly, you still get to keep those discounts on the policy. So, when you're asking for more coverage because your income has more than doubled, you still get to apply that 30% off. So just think of it as that alone could impact your rates by 30% had you waited till you are out of training. So when it comes to the health side of things, there's a lot of different health concerns or medications, diagnosis, recent visits, and things that can impact the policy. Now, we go through these personalized quotes with people and vet those out and compare all 5 companies every single time so that we can make sure we're talking about your specific individual situation. But I've kind of put 4 of them that are pretty common and also very different in how and what they are, obviously, but also how they impact your policy. So these 4 are just kind of some that we talk about a lot, and it's also just to kind of give an example on some things that can happen. And so, first one being mental health. Mental health is probably one of the main, pre-existing medical concerns or prescription history related concerns that we're talking about because this is very common and it's also the most common exclusion we see because it's pre-existing. Now, a lot of policies out there don't actually offer mental health coverage. These companies do offer 24 months of mental health coverage as long as you've had no pre-existing concerns. Now, for example, residency is one of the most common times because of stress, fatigue, maybe changes while you're moving or you're starting a family and moving. Those types of things can cause changes where maybe you saw a therapist, maybe you were diagnosed with depression, maybe you started taking ADHD medication. There's lots of ways those can impact your policy differently, but also getting the policy before any of that were to happen would guarantee that you'd have some of that mental health coverage. Pregnancy is another really common one. I talk to a lot of women about this because there can be pregnancy complications that leave you long-term disabled where you can't work your job either for a period of time or much longer beyond, just maternity leave. So what I tell people, these are long-term disabilities. So they only cover long-term complications. So something like maternity leave is already going to be covered under, a short-term policy, maybe through your employer, or if your employer pays actual maternity leave. But pregnancy complications are covered under this. And so this is a really common one that we talk about a lot. Any pre-existing history that can be excluded. Now, there are some companies even that are better to maybe push back with if they're excluding something that we can maybe amend that or talk through that and see which company would handle that a little bit better to try to get that coverage. If not now, maybe getting a policy and adjusting it later. There are companies that will do that. So another kind of big one that we talk about and a reason to talk with somebody like us at Pattern so that you can really go through all of those differences that are specific to you. So Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Now, this is just an interesting one. We see it quite a bit, but it's interesting because things looked at in the insurance eye and in the medical eye are a lot different, where they have a one-time look to offer this policy. So they're, going to be more strict on some of these things where, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis could be controlled at the time with diet change or medication. And it seems like, you're pretty healthy, but actually these companies can be pretty hard on this one. They, sometimes will not only exclude any disability relating from Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, they may also make further modifications to your policy. Maybe your premiums have gone up. Maybe they are offering less years of coverage. Maybe instead of paying out till you're age 65, they only offer 10 years of coverage. So there are some nuances to a diagnosis like that as well that can automatically drop down that coverage and also increase your premium at the same time. Now, sleep apnea, another interesting one because again, you could, treat this, you could be pretty healthy otherwise, but they do see this as higher risk. But it also depends on things like when was this diagnosed? Was it mild? Was it more severe? What was the treatment plan? Is it compliant with like a CPAP? There are things like that that go into not just the sleep apnea, but the Crohn's and the mental health that we're talking about, where things that they're looking for are consistency. Did you follow the treatment plan? Was it cleared and it's no longer an issue? How recent was the diagnosis? For sleep apnea, just an example, I had somebody who had been diagnosed just about 2 years ago. This was earlier this week, and they got declined that coverage. So they actually had a repeat sleep study done, and they just got a full policy offer this week. So there are things like that where the thing I really like about what we do, as far as, kind of vetting out these quotes and talking about these things with you, is that we're able to, work with you on that end of it and help you get the best policy. But after that, we're also going to be there to help you adjust that policy later. So we're not just going to talk with you on the front end and then you'll never hear from us again. We're kind of be your go-to in that liaison between the insurance company to kind of help you make these changes as your income, family, career can change, because we know that doesn't stay the same, and this is a long-term policy. So who to buy from? So this kind of goes into that that I just shared about kind of what we do in our process. Ultimately, you want a broker who offers true own occupation. So again, that's going to be very specific to you rather than having to make a claim that you can't work any job. So you really only want to be focusing on true own occupation policies. The best way to know that it's own occupation is if it's one of those 5 companies that I showed earlier. That's the best way to know because they're the 5 on the market that have that language out of the 20 some companies that there are that you can get disability through. So that's definitely something to look for. Now, as far as a broker is somebody who isn't with a specific company, but you want somebody that's a broker who is unbiased because they're going to show all your options, talk through what your best one is based on some of those medical experiences, or what state you're living in even can be an impact to what the price is. If you're maybe moving to somewhere that's cheaper, maybe you're starting out in residency as a hospitalist, but you're about to go into critical care. Well, actually, it's cheaper to get your policy as a hospitalist, even though you can still be covered for critical care. So lots of nuances that go into that. So you really want somebody that's going to show all of your options with an unbiased opinion. Now, there is something to look for too. It's not on this slide specifically, but kind of plays into this when you're filling out, quote requests and trying to gather quotes online. One, it makes it simpler to have them all in one spot. But the reason we ask those questions, like any recent diagnosis or prescription history up front, is it's a quick 3 questions. Our quote request is still pretty short. It takes about maybe 5 minutes to fill out. But we're not just going to ask you 3 questions, your name, your age, and where you live, because we don't want to show generic quotes that could look completely different without any idea what that might look like once you apply and actually get an offer. It can take some time to go through that process, and we don't want to waste your time. In worst case, you could get declined if there's generic quotes where really if we would have asked those questions, one of those companies may not be your best option. So definitely recommend taking, the few extra minutes on the front end to fill out a quote request that's really going to give you more personalized quotes. So we've talked about health and discounts. Something that we go through in our presentation for your quotes with clients is employer coverage versus private coverage, because this is very common. You can have other sources of disability insurance protection, and it's very common for residents and fellows. A lot of times your programs already have some that you're just auto enrolled in while you're there, but the problem is when you leave, it doesn't come with you. Now, as an attending though, there are some jobs that offer with their benefits long-term disability. And a lot of times you're just auto enrolled in that because you work there and they're going to pay for it and you're just automatically enrolled in it. Now, the difference is shown here. Employer coverage is not true own occupation. So again, the only time that's going to kick in is if you can't work any other job. Now, additionally, It seems great that they're paying those premiums, but they are taxable when they pay out your coverage. If you get disabled, your full income is not actually protected. So think of, you've got to really make the claim that you can get the coverage, but it's also not going to be the full coverage if you get that coverage. And the other part that I kind of mentioned is it's not portable. When it's not your own policy, it's kind of while you work at that employer, maybe you get disabled long term more severely and you can't work there anymore and they don't have a job for you, and maybe that disability insurance lapses. So that's something to watch for as well. Now, your private coverage is own occupation. It is not taxable, so they do after tax on this income replacement, and it's always going to be portable. We get asked a lot, what happens if I move? As long as you have the policy locked in, moving to a new state is not going to impact that. So this slide just kind of shows an example of how employer versus private coverage works, because with that being said, if you're automatically enrolled in employer coverage, it's not really an option to opt out of it while you're working there. And the good news is you can still have private disability insurance with that. So you can still supplement your employer coverage with a true own occupation policy. So this chart just kind of shows on the left-hand side, let's say your overall income pre-tax is 400,000. So you can see the portion in gray that is kind of showing what would be taken out for taxes, where that green bar is what you'd actually receive. So on the right-hand side, disability insurance should be able to cover as close as they can to that post-tax amount, whether that's from one policy or you are somebody that has employer coverage, and both of them together combined should be able to cover that full post-tax amount. So as you can kind of see, the employer contribution, usually they kind of have a cap on how much they'll cover. Even though disability insurance should cover about 60% of your income, employer coverage is capped out. It's kind of either 60% or let's say a maximum of 10K, and it's whichever one happens first, and then it's taxed. And so that's why it's kind of a minimal amount there of your post-tax income that it would cover, where you can see the private insurance can supplement the remainder. Now, obviously, for somebody, let's say doing contract work or in private practice, you could just cover your full income with just your private policy if you did not have employer coverage. Another thing we kind of go through in the presentation when you fill out a quote request and talk to one of our advisors is kind of the ins and outs of the actual policy features. So there's some add-ons which are called riders. Basically, there's lots of riders out there. Most of them are unnecessary or extra cost, and it just doesn't make sense to have them on the policy for what this policy is meant to do. And so we kind of show the big four that are recommended for physicians that a lot of physicians are buying. And even then, when we talk with you, we'll always show everything you could get side by side, all the companies, but we can always talk through what makes most sense for you. You don't have to take all of these things, but we show what's most necessary for physicians. So a couple of the common ones, first of all, this is very important to have a non-cancelable guaranteed renewable policy. This just means that the insurance company, as long as you're holding the policy and paying your premiums, cannot cancel on you. So it doesn't mean that you can't cancel. I get asked that a lot. In fact, the goal is to eventually be able to be financially independent, live off your assets, and maybe you've decreased this policy over time or you don't need it. You can always cancel. This is to make sure stability-wise that the insurance company can't cancel on you, and they also can't change your premiums. Something to watch for is there's policies out there that, every 10 years as you get older, they adjust your premiums. These policies can't do that under that guaranteed renewable language. Now, cost of living adjustment, we all know inflation makes things more expensive as time goes on. So cost of living is going to be on there so that if you get disabled, whatever your full coverage is going to kick in. But every year that you're still disabled, they're going to pay you 3% more. So it's increasing what they're paying you a little bit every year so that your benefit amount or your coverage amount isn't staying, stagnant. It's not exactly the same if you're disabled, maybe 6 months versus 10 years, that's going to make an impact. Now, the future purchase option, this is a huge point of conversation, especially, talking to people in training early on. We're trying to get this while you're healthy. This is going to allow you to ask for that additional coverage as an attending, or even as an attending when you've already increased once, maybe your income goes up again. This is going to allow you to ask for that additional coverage without doing another health screen. Now, this one is simply a matter of being healthy when you first get the policy. When I talked earlier about health causing modifications, this is something we will vet out for you on. Maybe there's one company out of the 5 that's willing to offer this future purchase option, and maybe there's 4 that are not. At least we're going to know that up front. And so this is really important, because if you don't have it, you can still ask for more coverage later. It's just going to require that health screen, which as time goes on, more can come up in your medical history. And so it just gets a little bit more difficult. So definitely a really important one that we try to get on the policy. Now, partial disability. So these policies do pay you if you are partially disabled. Now, that can look a lot of different ways for a lot of different specialties, whether it's the surgeon doing a mixture of surgery and clinical work, and they can't do surgery anymore, but they can keep doing clinical. And this is going to supplement what they were making from doing surgery, even though they might still be working full-time clinical and earning that full income from clinical work. So this is going to supplement, percentages that you're losing based on either time in your job lost or income. They'll look at both. Now, this could also come into play for somebody who just has to go part-time, maybe for an illness or an injury where you just can't work full hours, whether doing procedures or not. You just can't do all of your job duties, and they're going to match whatever percentage you're losing. We had a case where somebody had an ocular issue and could no longer drive at night. And as physicians know, it's more pay at night with the differential. And so she was losing out on that. Not that she couldn't do her job when she got there, but she couldn't get there by driving. And so they actually paid partial disability for that. So lots of different reasons this can come in, and lots of different ways that can look for different people. So again, we'll always talk through these in our presentation with your personalized quotes, and we can always work through which ones make the most sense for you. So how does it work? First, you just request those quotes by filling out that short form online. So you can go to patternlife.com. It's like the first button on there that says disability insurance. And like I said, it takes maybe 5 minutes, and it has a few additional questions so that we can make sure you're getting that time well spent in the meeting. And we've actually, compared more accurate quotes rather than generic quotes. So there are some out there that it's 3 clicks and you're done, but that's why we still ask a few additional questions just to make sure we're vetting that out for you. Once you request that and schedule a meeting with one of our advisors, we'll compare that with you. So again, it'll be kind of a side-by-side comparison with that information you provided factored into that, so we can get as accurate as possible on the quoting side. And then, of course, we'll help you get your policy. We'll look at all your discounts, all the riders you want, make sure that's set up how you want it. There is some time in between when you actually apply and have to take an offer. So it takes a little bit of time, and you're never committed till you get to see that offer, and we get to talk through again what that actually looks like after going through the process, and how you for sure want to set up that policy. So this is just kind of an example of what it looks like in our presentation, your chart. So you can see those 5 companies I've been talking about are listed at the top. On the left-hand side, some of those riders or long-term disability nuances that I've been speaking about are listed. And so this is just kind of what your quotes would look like personalized to you. And so here is our website, patternlife.com/webinar. You can fill out a quote request. It takes 5 minutes or less. We also have this QR code on here that you can just scan, and it'll take you right there. We do also, when we talk with you, we always mention referrals, because one, you're now educated to go tell your colleagues a little bit about this. So we believe in that education, and we will send you gift cards, $100 gift cards for those referrals. So we do really appreciate that as part of our process as well. And so now I kind of just want to open it up to any questions that anybody has.
All right. Thank you, Shelby. We do have a couple questions. So I was diagnosed with sleep apnea 5 years ago. Since then, I lost some weight and have not been troubled by it, and stopped using my CPAP 2 years ago. Is that still considered a pre-existing condition?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, first thing I recognized is it was 5 years ago. They really are focusing on the last 5 to 7 years of medical history. But if something that was first diagnosed 7 years ago pops up from 5 years ago in the notes, they're going to look at that. Now, sleep apnea, they're more concerned with when it was diagnosed if it was in the last 2 years. So that's already on your side that it was 5 years ago. Stopping, the CPAP, not needing treatment anymore, that's great. What they're going to look at is, was that based on, your third party physician and you talking and deciding that that was best for you and that you didn't need it. Voluntarily stopping any treatments or medications is where it gets a little tricky. But ultimately, that scenario of 5 years ago and no issues now, that should actually not cause a huge problem.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelby. We got another one for you. So, if I don't get the non-cancelable rider, under what circumstances would the insurance carrier cancel my policy?
Yeah, so it could be a number of things, but like the first one that comes to mind is, if something happens to the company, where they just decide they don't want to hold that policy anymore, whether for financial reasons, they stop selling the disability products, they don't want to service the policies anymore because they stop selling them, they go under. I mean, they have the right to cancel that policy. Now, with that, they also could change your premiums around. So these are that's kind of already factored into these 5 companies, that non-cancelable part, but we always make sure we are actually applying for it because you can get policies that are not non-cancelable.
Great. Thank you, Shelby. And we got another question. Could you discuss how to go about purchasing a GSI/ guaranteed standard issue disability insurance policy?
Yeah, so I want to talk through for anyone who doesn't know what the GSI is. It stands for Guaranteed Standard Issue. So that's a lot of words that basically means if you are at a program that has, one agent set up to sell one of these companies, it should be one of these, because if it's not, then you're weighing on the side of not getting an ONOC policy. So it should be one of these. And basically, what a GSI does is they have to sell a certain amount of them, and if they can get that many at that program, they can keep selling them. And so what they'll do is they'll issue it to you without any medical review. Now that can be quicker. And for the person who has a lot of health concerns, where maybe we've ran quotes like this on the general market and it's not looking so good, the GSI is probably the better option. Now, the difference is the GSI is sometimes more expensive because they are unisex rates. So that can get a little tricky on the cost. And they're also just set up one specific way with certain riders. And that's kind of a take what you get, just because, they're doing it without reviewing medical history. Now, it's still own occupation. It's still a pretty good setup. And it's much better for somebody who may not actually get a policy on the general market to at least get that. So if you find out that you have a GSI, and that's not something any agent can show, it's something at your program, and not all programs have it. And unfortunately, we don't actually know. But we will recommend that in the case before ever applying somebody that the quotes look really bad. We will recommend you just kind of look into it just to see, ask your benefits department, ask HR, just to see if that's an option, because we always would say get that first, and then we can actually still apply on the general market just to see that it would be a better offer, it's going to be cheaper. We can still do that. The problem is, if you apply on the general market first and get declined, you can't go back and get that GSI. So ultimately, it's not something to worry about for the person who doesn't really have medical history, but in that scenario, we kind of look into whether or not that's an option.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelby. We do have a couple more questions that we have time for tonight. The first one is, what are some ballpark high and low annual premiums? And then our attendee said, I understand these will vary greatly.
Yes, so definitely vary greatly. And we kind of look at it, we kind of show monthly premiums on the chart. Now I can give you some ballparks for annual too, but we show that just to kind of make it a little bit simpler to look at them side by side. And also we have it priced out on our chart right under, and I might be able to get back to this. Oh, it's not on here. So on our chart, right under where we show your premiums, we will show what's called a price per 100. It's basically the price for every $100 of coverage you would need. And so we kind of price it out even by that. So, I mean, monthly premium for a resident, we can see it as low as $100, and we can see that go up to $300 a month. So that is based on, health. Is there health concerns that are making it more expensive, or specialty? Some are more high risk than others, and how they're quoted. So some specialties are more expensive. The person in California versus the person in Nebraska, which is where we are at Pattern, California is way more expensive. So that's why I see it on an average from, $100 to $300 for a healthy person. So that's including, the training discounts, all those riders we talked about. And so I would say the most common is right in that $200 a month range. So right in that $2,000 to $3,000 annual premium.
All right, thank you, Shelby. And I think this might be our last one for tonight. This attendee is asking, so policy rates vary by gender. Could you talk a little bit more about that, Shelby?
Yeah, so it is gender specific. So with disability insurance, across the board, females do pay higher rates based on statistics of who is using the policy. So males, it tends to be a little bit cheaper. Now, again, given all those other demographics, some females probably pay less than males because if you're a cheaper specialty or you're healthier, but ultimately the gender part of that is that it's a little bit more expensive for females. Now, that's actually the opposite for like term life insurance, where it's actually a little bit more expensive for males based on who uses that. So that's just kind of based on the statistics. I brought up unisex because there used to be policies out there, even on the general market. It was very few in certain states with certain companies. So it was very narrowed down. For males, that made it more expensive in those unisex states. For females, that made it a little cheaper. March of 2023, so about a year ago now, is when those stopped. So the only time you'll find those is through a GSI, if that GSI is unisex.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelby. I think that's about it for questions tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you to Shelby for giving us this excellent overview. If you'd like to learn more about disability insurance or start a quote request, go ahead and scan that QR code that's on your screen. Visit us at patternlife.com/webinar. And if you'd like to stay connected with us, go ahead and give us a follow on social media. We're on all major social media platforms, and we're sharing educational material in those spaces pretty regularly. Make sure y'all have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
everybody.
guys for joining.